I'm Miranda, and today I'm going to be talking about help seeking and help giving on social media for image-based sexual abuse. A content warning before we begin that this talk will include text descriptions of image-based sexual abuse, so please take care of yourselves. If at any point you want to step out or take a break, you're welcome to come up to me afterwards or ask me questions at any point. So image abuse is a devastating yet common privacy violation that affects millions of people. Statistics in the US show that 1 in 10 women under 30 have experienced their nudes being shared without their consent or the threat of that. And recent work from this year showed that 1 in 7 adults have experienced sextortion. And reports about these different forms of image-based abuse show that it is likely to continue to increase. But image abuse is not a new phenomenon. So-called revenge porn in the 1980s was published in magazines and then hosted on websites in the 2010s. In the 2000s and in the 2010s, it was being posted on social media sites, and it continues to take on new forms. In 2016, scholars McGlynn and Rackley argued for renaming this phenomenon as image-based sexual abuse, which is a more accurate term and better captures the range of victim-survivor experiences, which is including but not limited to the quote-unquote revenge porn. And so a better definition of image-based sexual abuse is the taking, distributing, and/or making threats to distribute nude or sexual imagery without a person's consent. However, formal support for IBSA remains sparse or insufficient. Laws and enforcement about IBSA, while growing each year, is still in early stages, and there are amazing advocacy organizations, but they are chronically underfunded and understaffed. And finally, the space of technical and policy solutions remains limited, which may lead many victim survivors of IBSA to turn to informal sources of support rather than formal. And one source of informal support, very common to seek help online, is Reddit, which is home to thousands of online subcommunities and endless conversation and connection. And anyone who isn't familiar with Reddit, here's an example of a Reddit post. It contains a title and body, which is posted to a specific subreddit by the OP or the original poster. There are comments in response to that post, as well as threads, which are a set of replies to a single comment. So in the research questions for this work, we wanted to understand first, what types of IBSA do people seek help for on Reddit, as well as what gender and relationship dynamics exist between the perpetrators and the victim survivors. Second, we were interested in what kinds of help people sought when posting to Reddit and when they sought this help. And third, we wanted to know what kinds of help commenters offered and whether it was supportive. To answer these questions, we developed a custom data pipeline. We started with a Reddit scrape of 5.7 million posts from 43 selected subreddits related to scams, dating, and sex. And we then used LLMs to filter this to a pool of 113,000 posts likely related to IBSA. And finally, we used LLMs to then categorize, and we manually reviewed all of these posts to develop a final data set of 261 posts, stratified by the type of IBSA, as well as 160 threads randomly sampled from those posts. So now for the results, I'll discuss these in the order of the research questions, starting with the types. As I described before, scholars have theorized about image-based sexual abuse as an umbrella term for a large category of harms, and in this work, we uniquely categorize these harms with first-person reports. So many forms of IBSA involve the imagery of a victim survivor being held or shared, such as in non-consensual explicit imagery, or NCEI, so revenge porn, quote unquote, would fall in this category. But there's also pressurized sexting, not financial sextortion, and non-financial sextortion. And there are also forms of IBSA where the imagery of the victim survivor was created by the perpetrator specifically to abuse, such as in synthetic NCEI or in recorded sexual assault. And in our data set, we also had imagery of a perpetrator being used for abuse, such as in the case of cyberflashing. Now, these types aren't mutually exclusive, and this isn't a comprehensive taxonomy of all IBSA, but these were the types that we found on Reddit. So here's an example to show you what I mean about the help seeking. I've highlighted the most relevant parts of this example from financial sextortion. The poster writes, "So I fell for a scam on Snapchat. I totally fell into their trap and sent a pic. Then they said they'll share it to a ton of my followers and asked for $500 to not send it. I was so scared, I just sent it." Now notice in this case, the poster did not know the scammer. And so to get into some relationship dynamics in IBSA, we see that financial sextortion was most often perpetrated by a stranger, unlike other types of IBSA where the perpetrator was more often already known to the victim survivor. So as I mentioned, in financial sextortion, of the cases that we looked at, 48 involved a stranger, while only 1 was from a perpetrator who had an existing or prior relationship to the victim survivor. And contrast this to NCEI, or recorded sexual assault, where the perpetrator was much more often a partner, an ex-partner, a friend, a colleague, or even a family member. And other types of IBSA, like pressurized sexting, were in the middle in terms of the relationship dynamics. To give you an example of how posters were dealing with IBSA in existing relationships, here's an example of help seeking for non-consensual synthetic explicit imagery. The poster writes, "I just saw edited nude pics of my boyfriend's friends on his phone. I've been with him for over 5 years. Today I found out that he has some pics of his exes that he edited to make them look naked. What should I do?" Now note, in this case, the victim survivor has known the perpetrator for 5 years. And also speaking about the gender dynamics in IBSA, we see that financial sextortion is an outlier where the victim survivor was more often men, and the victim survivor was more often men, and the perpetrator was more often women, although a note about that later. For non-consensual explicit imagery, it is more often that the victim survivor was a woman and the perpetrator was a man. And again, pressurized sexting and some of the other types fall in the middle. And the note that in financial sextortion, the high number of perpetrators who are women might be because scammers are using these as their false identities. So again, to summarize, men are more often victim survivors of financial sextortion, which is very different from the other types of IBSA. Stepping back to reflect on some trends in these types of IBSA, we can see that these types can be situated in relation to existing security and privacy literature. For example, financial sextortion is related to prior literature on relationship scams. NCEI and recorded sexual assault are similar to intimate partner abuse, and pressurized sexting and cyber flashing related to prior work on online dating privacy. Although most notably there are differences, especially that the explicit images in IBSA uniquely compounds the harms that were described in prior work. And another thing I'd like to highlight is that for all of these forms of IBSA, non-abuse cases also exist. For example, consensual sexting or consensual imagery creation and sharing. And so the dual nature of this phenomenon shows that there's both abuse and non-abuse depending on consent. So summarizing our types about results, we've characterized some gender and relationship dynamics across these 7 types of IBSA using unique first-person reports and shown how financial sextortion is an outlier within this space. Moving on to help seeking, and specifically I'll start with when help was sought. So we can use the Design for At-Risk Users framework, which outlines 4 phases of a safety event for people who are at risk. Those phases are prevention, monitoring, active event, and recovery. Now, a user could move through these states non-linearly and could experience multiple safety events. But for the help-seeking posts that we looked at, we saw that active event and recovery were most common. And specifically for active event, this was 55% of all posts. Posters were often panicked and wanted immediate help on what to do and figure out how to stop the harm or figure out what to do next. And so this represents a unique opportunity to help people in a critical moment. To say more on the types of help seeking, I'll demonstrate with an example from pressurized sexting. In this case, the poster writes that they were being made to send naked pics by a girl. What do I say? They wrote that they were so afraid that she, the perpetrator, would hate me if they didn't send pictures, and asked if it was controlling and sexist for them to not send what she wants. So I've highlighted some of the types of help seeking here. The what do I say referring to relational. How do I relate to a person? What do I respond to them? There's also therapeutic help seeking here in terms of dealing with the negative emotions. and informational help seeking about whether this is a situation that involves harm. And I've also put some of the percentages here that show over all of the posts, the 261 posts, what percentage that type of help seeking appeared. And in a type of help seeking that was not in this example was legal or technical, which was relatively rare in our data set, about 16% of posts overall. So in help seeking, we've documented 5 types, and now I'll turn to help giving. So here are 2 examples to just sample from the wide range of responses that people received on Reddit. On one hand, some support could be really helpful and empathetic. One poster shared their personal experiences saying, I also got blackmailed through Snapchat, but it's been almost 3 months. I haven't heard anything since, and it seems okay now. Of course, not all comments are that helpful, and commenters sometimes recommended that posters take really drastic actions. Another example of a comment was a commenter who wrote, your girlfriend's ex sent the photo, that's fucking me up to the point I would dump her. So notice in this case, the perpetrator was not actually the person who they were in a relationship with, but they're just recommending dump the person, just get out of that situation, which is not the most nuanced response, but overall, with respect to help giving, it was usually well-aligned and supportive. In a few cases, it lacked nuance. So as I come to the conclusion of my talk, I'll now touch on some implications of Reddit as a source of informal support. And we see that Reddit seems reasonable, and it's especially useful for people who want to remain anonymous, which is paramount for victim survivors who would not be comfortable revealing their identity. But this is only a complement to institutional support and not a replacement, because at the end of the day, Redditors can share kind words, but they can't actually help you take down content or provide legal remedies. They can only point you in those directions. And we also saw that the burden was helpfully spread across multiple subreddits, so that doesn't overburden one community. But this also means that best practices can take a long time to solidify because they're happening in these different places. In terms of future work, we see that there are opportunities to support this community and also explore other points of intervention. This was just one snapshot into IBSA, and there are many other places to support victim survivors, like people who wouldn't think to post on Reddit. And we also saw that technical solutions are part of the answer, but they weren't always on the front of victim survivors' minds. And so further solutions, technical, but also social and policy, are needed. And we also need to continue to draw on socio-technical concepts and the expertise of gender-based violence scholars in order to make progress in this space. Thank you so much to all of my collaborators. This was a huge team effort, and I could not have done it without them. Happy to take any questions now.